Morning, everybody. We are here working on the Camaro this morning. We got the turbo back from Forced Inductions. I'll show you that. So this is a Forced Inductions cast 80mm turbo with a V1 housing on it. This has a 96mm exhaust wheel. It does have a 130 or a 110 exhaust housing. Standard these come with a 132 housing, but I had them put a 110 housing on this with a 96mm wheel. Wanted it to spool quicker. I think I've had this turbo for about 6 years or so. If I were to do it over again, I'd just stick with the 132 housing. I don't notice much of a difference with the 110 housing. So we are going to work on this morning. I'm going to take this over to the bench, get the drain put on it. The drain needs to be bolted up before the turbo goes back on the car. You can see where the turbo bolts up right there. We got both banks of the exhaust feed into it. One wastegate there. The wastegate's tucked here underneath the radiator. But what happens is the drain hose heads this direction and then into the scavenge pump right there. If I put the turbo on before doing the drain hose, you can't get the drain hose on it, and the drain hose actually needs to be attached to the fitting and tight before the fitting gets put on, otherwise you'll never get the hose on. It's a dash 12 hose, and so the fittings are large enough that it makes it tough getting it into that center section with both the exhaust and the compressor housings on. So I am going to go ahead and get the drain bolted on, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I got the drain line on. You can see it here. Bolted on through the flange. Put a little bit of silicone on there because I don't have a new gasket for it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to loosely back this V-band clamp off here so that I can rotate the exhaust housing a little bit. I'm positive this thing is not clocked the way it needs to be. So I'm going to loosen that, roll it a little bit. I've got a gasket that goes on here. I'm going to go ahead and set the camera up in the corner of the car so you can watch me put the turbo on. But we'll get the gasket on, we'll get the 4 bolts put in here loosely, and then we will clock the compressor housing, make sure it lines up with the cold side, and we'll go from there.
The devil you think that I am. There ain't no excuse, but I'm just a man. I slipped and I fell, it got out of hand. But I'm not the devil you think that I am. There wasn't no gun held to my.
Okay, so we got the turbo bolted on. It's tight. I did go ahead and leave the center section loose a little bit. You can kind of see I can roll it a little. And I leave that loose so that when I bolt the turbo on, I know that it's not pinching that, and it's not propping the turbo up, not going to damage the center section or anything. So I hit it with the impact and then just put a wrench on it just to make sure I got it tight. One thing I really like about these Ford Warner turbos is like the turbo that's on the Cutlass, the VS Racing turbo, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's got like 6 bolts I believe it's 6 bolts on the exhaust side and then 6 bolts on the compressor side, and you have to loosen all of those in order to get it clocked the way you want. With these Borg-Warner turbos, you just loosen the V-band on both sides, and you can clock the exhaust and the compressor however you want them. So the turbine is tight to the exhaust. I'm going to go ahead and hook up the drain hose to the scavenge pump, and then I will go ahead and make sure the center section is clocked the way I want it. I'll tighten the V-band on the exhaust side, and then I will clock the compressor housing the way that I want it. I'll go ahead and wipe out the cold side. It looks like it's still got a little bit of oil in it from when the seals went bad. So I'll wipe that out, get that on the compressor and tighten down, and then get the V-band on the compressor tight. And then I still have to hook up the oil feed hose. I still need to put I've got this piece over here. So this piece here is it screws into the top of the turbo, and then the AN hose screws to the top of that. What it is it's a one-way check valve. So the oil can come in, oil can't go back out the other way, but it's also got a 1 psi. It opens under 1 psi, and so what that does is when I shut the car off, it doesn't allow whatever oil is in the hose to drain into the turbo because it has no pressure behind it. So the oil ends up going up and kind of sits right here between the fitting and the check ball. And then once you start it and you get oil pressure again, it'll push through and end up in the turbo. So we'll go ahead and do that. Alright, one other thing I wanted to show. So I got that hose is tight. Here on the scavenge pump, so the inlet to the pump is obviously down here, and then it flows up. And then that hose right there actually pokes through the frame rail, you can see that, and goes into the oil pan. But right here, I've got another check valve. And again, the same purpose is so that when this pump here shuts off, the oil can't drain back from this hose and back into the pump. So this has got a one-way check valve also going that direction. So once this pump is shut off and it's not providing pressure anymore, the oil comes and it just sits here. It doesn't feed back into the pump. So that line's tight. We're going to go ahead, tighten the V-band on the exhaust housing. We'll roll the center cartridge up as straight as we can get it. It does not sit perfectly straight up. It sits at somewhat of an angle, but I'll explain here in a few minutes why the turbo had to be rebuilt, but that was my fault. It's been ran this way with the center housing clocked a little bit for a lot of years, and I think the fact that it has a scavenge pump pulling the oil out of it rather than relying on gravity feed is what allows me to get away with clocking that the way that it is.
There wasn't no gun held to my head. Got caught up believing in lies that were said, and in a moment of weakness I stumbled and I made my bed. But I'm not the devil you think that I am. Ain't no excuse, I'm just a man. I slipped and I fell, got out of hand.
Alright guys, so I got the downpipe on, oxygen sensors in, the cold side here is tight to the compressor, both V-bands on the center section are tight, the drain hose is tight, so all I have left to do is, you can see here's my feed hose, so it'll go in right there. I just gotta do some new thread tape on that check valve that I showed you, and I will get that screwed in, and then we'll get the hose hooked up, We'll clean off my handprints that I made a mess with. Looks like I need a zip tie down there for some of the, you can see those airlines down there are actually, they go from the boost controller to the wastegates. So it looks like some of them maybe had a zip tie or two break, so I'm going to get a zip tie and zip tie those back up. So we're almost done getting the turbo back in this thing, so just a few more minutes.
I'm not the devil you think that I am.
Alright, so upper line is on, check valve's in. When I was laying under there, I noticed that, kind of see it, one of those air fittings on the wastegate was loose. So I tightened that up. So we've got a little feed, oil drain, down pipe. It's tight to there, it's tight here. I believe we are ready to crank this thing and see if it'll fire. It should fire, I have no reason to believe it won't. So when I get this thing started, I'm going to check and make sure I have oil pressure. I'll keep it just running at an idle. I'll make sure that I don't have any leaks on either the feed side or the drain side or the scavenge pump. And hopefully we don't have any oil coming out of the downpipe. That'd be nice.